Check, check, 1, 2. Here we go once again for another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, your resource for helping you break free of the stressful, dogmatic diet and exercise rat race, helping you get in the best shape of your life on your own terms. Matt Schifferly here, founder of the Red Delta Project and author of the books Fitness Independence and Smart Bodyweight Training. Speaking of bodyweight training, today's topic, we're taking a look at some of the common ideas or methods that you often come across in the weightlifting world and exploring, does it really apply to you if you're practicing primarily calisthenics? Where are the hits? Where are the misses? And does it even apply to you as an individual with your goals and aspirations? So let's just jump right on into it, shall we? The first point is the notion of a deloading week. Now, weightlifters will use this as a way to kind of recover from lifting heavy weights and poundages. That's one of the reasons why you usually find a deloading week in like powerlifting circles, Olympic lifting, sometimes with bodybuilding, but it depends on the approach of the bodybuilder. But the idea behind it is that you're subjecting yourself to a lot of wear and tear from this external resistance. It's hard on the joints, hard on the central nervous system, and giving yourself a week where you kind of back off a bit can help to refresh you, let yourself heal and recover, and come back stronger so you can continue to make progress. A lot of times, deloading weeks are also a bit of a recommendation for those who have seemed to hit a plateau, and it's like, well, you kind of need to just back off a bit. So the question, does it apply to calisthenics? Well, in some ways, yes, but in general, not always. It may not be that important. The reason is because calisthenics doesn't really use that much external load on the body. There's not as much stress on the joints, hopefully, if your technique is dialed in. The central nervous system doesn't get nearly as much wear and tear on it. And in general, there's a lot of volume that's often practiced with calisthenics, but the intensity and the volume is often not there because workouts are typically very efficient. So for the average calisthenics aficionado, it may not be that important. But like a lot of things in fitness, it probably matters more if it matters to you. Some people push themselves much harder than others. Also, consider other variables of recovery in your lifestyle. Diet, sleep, just overall stress. Sometimes people feel like they just need a week to rest and recover, and they don't want to necessarily stop training, but backing off and giving themselves a little bit of an easier path can refresh the mind, refresh one's training, step back and reevaluate your progress and what kind of things you might want to do. It's all helpful in a deload week. At the same time, I'm not a big fan of like mandatory requiring a deload week. Sometimes people will say, well, I'd take a deload week every 6 weeks, but it feels like an interruption, like I'm going like gangbusters. I'm feeling great. Do I really need to take a deload week? And in those scenarios, I would say, probably not. If you're feeling good and you're making good progress, I see no reason why you can't just keep right on trucking, and you don't need to interrupt your training with anything that's lighter or easier. All right, on to number 2. The second method that's very popular in weightlifting circles is the concept of periodization, particularly with athletes and athletic weightlifting like Olympic lifting, kettlebell training. Sometimes competitive athletes use a lot of periodization. The general idea with a periodization is simply you organize your training routine or plan throughout the year or the season in a series of what they call blocks. And each block has a particular emphasis to it, where you say, I'm focusing on strength, or focusing on explosive power, or focusing on improving my ability to do a certain technique. And the idea behind periodization is if you focus on doing something for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, hell, a block can even be a single workout, then you're bound to make a little bit faster progress than if you kind of just cover all your bases all at once. That doesn't mean that you're focusing on just one thing. You're still doing everything else, but not nearly as much. So you might, if you have an hour-long workout, you might spend, for example, half of the hour working on handstands, and then the rest of it working on the rest of your techniques. Or you might emphasize strength training, so all of your routines use a fairly heavy load and less reps. So periodization is one of those things that can be very beneficial for helping you advance, particularly beyond beginning stages. And with calisthenics, I think this makes a lot of sense, particularly since there's a lot of movements and activities that are fairly skill-based. I know Gold Medal Bodies Fitness now, they kind of use a similar approach where they would say, like, focus on ring work for a few weeks to a couple of months and just make that kind of your main thing. Then you can work on other things afterwards as a way to kind of keep you moving forward. Personally, I find that periodization is a very good approach, especially if you have a number of objectives you want to accomplish, but it's not necessarily the best for the beginning athlete. When you're just starting off, you probably don't need to organize your training in various blocks. You can probably get away with having a generalized routine that kind of covers a lot of bases. And your number one objective when you're starting off should be getting in the habit of training, getting in the habit of having good recovery behaviors like getting good sleep, getting good food, and getting accustomed to the exercises themselves. Throwing periodization and, okay, how long should a block be and what should I focus on, maybe just a lot of noise and stuff that the beginner needs to focus on that just makes things more difficult and can derail that consistency and habits when you're kind of more volatile at losing your way. So I would say a beginner would be anywhere from 1 to 3 years of training. But if you're starting to feel like you're not emphasizing certain things enough or you're plateauing faster, give periodization a try. And of course, there's a million different ways you can periodize. You can do it 100 different ways. I'll focus on many different things. What I would recommend is just simply make a list of 2, 3, maybe as many as 4 things that you want to focus on. And then just simply break out your calendar and say, all right, this amount of time I'm going to focus on strength, and this amount of time I'm going to focus on improving my muscle up, and so on. And you can adjust your blocks as you see fit, but that's usually a good way to get started. All right, number 3, after periodization, we have drop sets. And drop sets are a common practice, particularly amongst those who are the physique weightlifters, bodybuilders, physique competitors, and people who are interested in maximizing their muscle growth. The theory behind it is that muscular fatigue is correlated with hypertrophy and building your muscles. And there's some debate over it, but especially some of the research that's coming out now, there's a lot to suggest that muscular fatigue is correlated with muscle growth. I'll post a couple links on the website that this podcast will be hosted on. I'll have an article with some links to Stronger by Science. There's a lot coming out suggesting that if you take your muscles to a good level of fatigue, then muscle growth will roughly be the same from one subject to another. Doesn't matter so much what the load is, what the rep range is, the speed. As long as that muscle's getting pretty good and fried, that's the seemingly consistent variable from one individual to another regarding muscle growth. So the idea with a drop set is that you spend more time working the muscle to a higher level of fatigue. So in the weightlifting world, instead of saying you do an exercise where you're doing, let's say, 100 pounds, and you push yourself till you're really struggling to get that 100 up, and then you rack it, you wait, you rest, you grab some water, and then when your muscles are recovered, you keep going. A drop set would be where you push yourself to that level of fatigue, put the weight down, and immediately drop the weight to like 90 pounds, and then continue to do the exercise. So you're fatigued, but you're using less weight so you can continue to go. Then once you can't press that anymore, then you drop it to 80 pounds, and you keep going, and 70, and so on. And sometimes you can do a drop set for just 1 or 2 levels. Sometimes you can do it a lot. The whole idea is to really take your muscles to that burning, all-out kind of level of fatigue and just keeping them there for a longer period of time and inducing more muscular fatigue. So with calisthenics, can you do this? Absolutely, because we adjust our resistance by our technique. So all you simply do when you're getting tired is you use an easier technique. One of the ways I like to do this is just use less range of motion. For example, with pull-ups, you're doing pull-ups and you're getting to the point where you're like, I can't do any more pull-ups. Well, just pull yourself up halfway. and then you pull yourself up quarter of the way after a few reps. You can also do a drop set where you're doing like seated pull-ups or rows, or some variation that you're pulling your hands closer to you, but it's an easier exercise so you can really make that muscle good and tired. The verdict on this, though, is I'm not entirely sure if this really does anything for the physique. While fatigue is correlated to muscular growth, we don't know if there's a diminishing rate of return on this one. If you make yourself super tired, does that mean you're going to build a lot more muscle? Or maybe just a tiny bit more muscle? And there's definitely an associated cost with creating more fatigue. As I've mentioned in the past, you don't need to recover from working out. You need to recover from fatigue. And methods like drop sets that induce more fatigue will require more recovery. So it's something to consider for your own personal situation. If you're struggling to build muscle, or you're feeling like you just can't push your muscles very hard, drop sets can be great. However, if you're in the kind of situation where you need to be fairly active and have a faster turnaround on your recovery, probably something to steer clear of. Like if you're doing heavy leg work and you're like, I've got a big hike tomorrow, yeah, probably not the best way to go about it. While more fatigue may produce more muscle growth, that extra muscle growth may just simply be faster muscle growth. So instead of building 5 pounds of muscle over the course of a month, you would build it over like 2 weeks with drop sets. But you'd probably still end up at the same place as without the drop sets, or with them. It'd just be getting you there a little bit faster. And the final thing to consider is the notion of, quote, attacking a muscle from different angles. And this is an idea that's very prevalent, particularly in the bodybuilding world, because when you are a bodybuilder, I'm talking a competitive bodybuilder, you're judged on the aesthetics of your physique. And it's much more than just the size of your physique. You can't just have a bunch of muscle, stand on stage, and win a bodybuilding contest. You're also judged on things like symmetry, proportion, and size relative to different areas. And because of that, bodybuilders have developed a lot of exercises and even equipment that help them pinpoint and target certain areas of their physique, so that if they feel that one little area is kind of holding back the overall aesthetic pleasing shape of their physique, they can kind of focus on that, bring it back up to speed, and then they can have a better chance of winning a contest. So one of the things that in calisthenics that I get asked a lot is, how do you carry this over to bodyweight training? And there's a couple little ways you can do it. You can do it with like suspension trainers, where you can do things like rear flies, and you can target maybe the upper chest with some incline push-ups versus regular push-ups. But here's my general take on it, is calisthenics doesn't really involve that much of a targeted approach towards developing specific little areas of the physique. I call this technical fragmentation in my book, Smart Bodyweight Training, where you say, I'm gonna develop and focus putting tension in this one muscle, little area right here, and that often means neglecting it in other areas. And while this may be beneficial if you're trying to get your physique to look as perfect as possible, it's probably not necessary to do that if you're like, I just want to be healthy, I want to look good naked, I want to be strong, I want to build muscle, but I don't really care so much if my shoulders are perfectly rounded, or if my vastus lateralis in my quad is the same exact sweep on my left side or my right side. If you're not really that concerned with it, don't worry too much about it. And in another way to look at it is, I would say it's probably not even necessary in most cases. Bodyweight training is very holistic in nature. It's not nearly as fragmented as classic bodybuilding techniques. A lot of targeted bodybuilding methods will say, we're going to put tension in this one area, and then we're going to use this exercise and this piece of equipment to put it in this area, and it's kind of piecemealed. And the way I kind of look at this approach is, yeah, you may be able to focus tension in one little area, but you're also neglecting it in other areas. And this can create a training routine that's very inefficient, requires a lot of exercises. You may be missing parts and areas that you're not really aware of, like a lot of leg training with machines where it really neglects the hips because you're sitting a lot. It can be problematic for those who are not competitive bodybuilders. So my approach has always been just have a very holistic carpet bombing approach to muscle tension. And that's where the idea of chain training comes about. I cover that in a chapter in my book, Smart Bodyweight Training, as well. I've got a free ebook. I think it's on the website. You can probably find it around online. But the whole idea is stop putting tension in little tiny pieces, like in the chest. Don't worry about your upper chest, your middle chest, your lower chest, your inner chest, your outer chest, your front chest, back chest. Don't worry about it. Just turn the whole damn thing on. When you're doing push-ups or dips, just use the entire thing as much as you can. So instead of having the glass half empty or half full, you just fill that sucker to overflowing and forget about what areas have more or less. Just totally flood your entire muscular chain with as much tension as possible, and that'll cover your bases pretty well. It's a lot more holistic. It's easier on the joints. It's also a hell of a lot more efficient, where you can cover a lot more ground with a couple of exercises instead of needing a lot of different exercises, different angles, different pieces of equipment, different techniques, and so on. So there you go. I hope that kind of gave you some things to think about. Tacking muscles, drop sets, periodization, and of course, deloading. Let me know if you have any questions, reddeltaproject@gmail.com. Don't forget, check out my books on Amazon. Paperback and Kindle versions are available of Fitness Independence as well as Smart Bodyweight Training. And as always, thank you guys so much for the reviews and all the love on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google, and anywhere else you can find this podcast as well. I'll talk to you guys next week. Till then, be fit and live free. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to find out more information on this topic, check out the video down below me on my right. And if you want to see my latest release, down here on the left will direct you to that as well. And as always, I upload new videos roughly about 5 to 6 times a week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the latest episodes.